In this chapter, we will activate surface noise in ZBrush to generate procedural masks to quickly create corrosion on our amulet. Next, we will use the clay buildup brush and the free downloadable orb brushes to hand sculpt destruction and weathering. So now it's time for us to start doing some extra destruction on this, giving it some imperfections so that we don't feel all of these super clean edges. So what I'm talking about in particular is, for example, up here in this image, you can see where this is kind of torn down a bit, some dents over here, and just some overall small noise, some different breaks, etc. We're going to do that because that's going to help us give it that non-CG feel, and also, more importantly, kind of an older feel to this. So before I do that, actually, I had stored a morph target previously, and I'm going to go ahead and use our morph brush by pressing B, and then M on my keyboard to find the morph brush, and just quickly go through here and paint out some of these sharp details, since it just feels very manufactured right now. So I'm just going to come through here. If I wanted, I could go really strong and remove it completely. But yeah, I'm just gonna sort of kind of erase some of these pieces so that it's not too strong. Again, these little touches, in my opinion, um, whenever you're kind of looking at it right now, it's not that noticeable, but in my experience, the human eye tends to catch small little things like this, which will, in the end result, make things feel a lot more natural as you're working with them, especially when you start applying textures and different things like that. I'm not going to go really, really strong on anything, but maybe a few here, take it almost down to nothing. Maybe we'll see if we can do that on the back a little bit. Okay, I didn't store a morph target for that. That's fine. So anyways, let's go ahead and start working on the destruction. And the way I like to do this is we're going to make a procedural mask using the surface tool over here, and then we're going to click on noise. So let's activate that, and that pops up another window here that pretty much mimics your ZBrush window. And it reacts just like your ZBrush window does as well. So I just want to zoom in here a bit closer because I want to get some details or see how the noise is affected. Now down here you can see there's like a little bit of kind of grainy information. That's your noise actually working. So over here, noise scale, we're going to play with this a bit, and we're also going to play with strength. I'm just going to increase the size here so that we can actually see it. And the strength, we'll keep something like this for now. And I'm just going to drag out some points on our graph. This might be a good time to really quickly review what we learned previously. Remember, by default, it goes to a Bezier curve. If you click on this and then drag and then come off, you can have that harder angle. But for this, I want it to be soft, so I'm just going to kind of keep that soft feel. But I am going to exaggerate these and really pull this up and down so I can see some interesting things happen with the surface. I'm going to reset this. Let's do this again. I think this is, maybe the scale just needs to be a bit bigger. And what I'm trying to do here is I don't want to get this too uniform. I'm going to just keep playing around with this until I get something that starts to feel right. Like this doesn't feel right to me because it feels like something that's sitting on top of the surface. I'm trying to find something that's going to kind of feel like it's subtracting. Like it's kind of eating away. Imagine over time it's getting corrosive. Like this, I think feels pretty cool. So let's just see what happens. I'm going to say OK at the bottom. And you'll see it right now. It's not actually applied to the mesh, but you can see it does feel like it's chewing away a bit. So before we do this, let's store a new morph target. I'm going to delete the old one and say store a morph target. Currently, this isn't actually applied to the mesh. So coming back up here to surface, now you can say apply to mesh. Now when we do that, you'll notice it's not quite as strong as what we had before. And in my opinion, this is actually really quite nice. This gives us a nice bit of surface detail and information without being overly strong. And you can tell that it's kind of cutting away and going inside. And that's kind of the feeling we want this to have. I kind of like that corrosive feeling. So since I have the morph brush activated, if you wanted, this is the area that's behind the gem, that wouldn't have been getting corrosive. You can come through here and change this, but it's honestly not a big deal for the gem because you don't see the gem. So, or sorry, you don't see the back behind it. So if this was an actual CG asset at a company, you probably wouldn't even worry about that. But whatever, I just want to kind of show you guys and demonstrate. And now I'm just going to kind of go through here and run the morph brush over a couple places just so, again, kind of that feeling that we're doing with the swirls. We don't want everything feeling uniform across this, so we're just removing some detail from different areas to allow your eye room to rest. Maybe on the inside here you wouldn't have much at all showing. You could reduce that a bit more. All right, in my opinion, this feels pretty good. Next thing we want to do is we want to break some of those bigger pieces, kind of like you see in here, the bigger chunks that are missing. So what we're going to do for that is just use a clay buildup brush. So I'm going to press B. I think by default it's up here, clay buildup. And by default, let's see what this does. As you can see, it's building up right now. So we want it to go in the negative. So let's change this from Z add to Z sub. Alternatively, on your keyboard, you could hold down on the Alt key and you can see that it's switching between plus and negative. If you're not doing this for a long time, you could hold down on the Alt key, but since we're going to do quite a bit of destruction, that's where I've changed it up here to default B Z sub. And the idea behind this is I'm just going to start removing a couple different more aggressive chunks so that it feels like maybe at some point there was some type of damage or it really had something corrosive happen to this. Whether this would have happened in real life or not, I don't know, but I think it's going to look cool. And I'm kind of thinking of this as if maybe this amulet is 100 years old or more, maybe longer than that. Maybe it's seen some damage as it's banged into things over the years. Maybe it's a relic from a war, who knows. So up here, maybe we go more aggressive and really cut out a chunk. One thing I like to do too is you don't want it to be too soft around the edges. Like you can see it starts to feel a little bit too clay-like. So at that point, a lot of times I'll come through and then more aggressively cut some of the sides here to just get a bit more faceting. And I'm not going to use it here a lot, but I know a lot of people, they like to use the trim dynamic brush. So B on your keyboard and press T, and over here, trim dynamic. This one's kind of nice for going in and then you can flatten out some of the planes and edges afterwards if you wanted this to have more of an angular cut feel to it. So you could use that in combination with the clay buildup brush to really quickly dig out some areas and then find some areas where you're like, okay, maybe this should feel like there was something a bit more blunt that hit the edge here. For my purposes though, on most of this, I am just going to use the clay buildup brush. Chewing away at some of the edges, things like that will be nice, and I'm going to keep doing that. Another thing that could be cool is having some areas where maybe it feels like at some point something hit this and caused a slash to go across. So for example, let's say over here, we do something like that. There's a really great brush set that's called the orb brushes that you can find online. I have them in here already, so I press B and then I press O. I think if you just type orb brushes online, you can find all these. So there's these great brushes in here, for example, orb slash brush. Let's just see what this does. You can kind of drag this out and get like this nice cut slash in here. In fact, let me see if I can find that real quick. Okay, if you guys go to Google and you just type orb brushes, right here at the top, orb brushes pack for ZBrush. This is actually a free brush pack by one of my coworkers, Michael Vicente, super talented guy. It has all these amazing brushes. If you haven't done this already, just go in and download these. They're free. You can give them some money if you want to. They're definitely worth it. But I'm going to use those really quick and show you what I have. Or actually, I did use them just a minute ago. So you see that big slash I put in here. I'm going to undo that. But the orb brushes just give you a lot of really awesome brushes that Vicente Michael has made over the years that he uses professionally and for his personal work. So yeah, I mean, look at that. That's really cool. It's hard to get that kind of cut easily with just hand sculpting. Now afterwards, I might do something like that, and then I come back in with my clay buildup brush in areas that feels like it's kind of pinched and CG like here. That's where I would come through afterwards and just kind of dig away at this so it doesn't feel like we had just kind of this weird cut through that didn't really make any sense. Because, sometimes when you have something that slashes through, imagine if something actually hit this. A blade might hit this, and then there'd be some empty space, and then it would cut through the top part again, and then you'd have a bit of empty space, maybe touching down here a bit, and then cutting through again. Like it wouldn't be a perfect stamp. So at that point, I could use a combination of my morph brush, and, find a place where maybe, okay, over here you don't quite see where it cuts in. Over here, you get it just a little bit on the edges, and then maybe it tapers off as we get over this way. And then it's suggested that the whole thing was slashed across, but it's not just right in your face. And then maybe over here you come through, and if you want, again, you can kind of emphasize a bit more since it's stamping and kind of pushing things in. Once you start to see like your cuts start to roll in where it almost feels like they've just bent in, that's something that normally isn't going to happen in real life. Once you have something that cuts across the surface, it's not going to conveniently bend it in. So that's where you can kind of go in afterwards and then finesse it a bit more. And yeah, if you wanted to, you could do your own slashes by hand, but I really recommend using some of those orb brushes. So I'll probably come through here, maybe do a couple more aggressive cuts on some of these places just to rip away at some larger chunks here. And you guys at home can spend as much time as you want or as little time as you want on this. I usually find, for example, maybe a piece like this, I'll probably spend about 20 or 30 minutes just kind of going through and cutting out some different things. If I was doing this as a live demo, I would probably only spend about 5 minutes in here just to show people and get the point of this. But here we can spend a bit more time, and also for those of you that end up purchasing this content, I want to make sure that you have a nice model that you'll be able to reference with some really cool um, details and cuts. Again, I like cutting away the main masses first, and then sometimes just to get a bit more of shadows to fall off. Eventually I'll come in underneath and start doing a bit more digging out around the edges and underneath areas. Something like that, like a bigger one that you have, it might be good to have a couple supporting cuts or information around the edges just because it feels kind of random that there's like such a big break right here. You could even go through and start to make your own kind of spider webbing type cracks that would lead away from this, as if maybe the material was a little weaker here at some point. It started to break over time a bit. I think the rule of thumb with sculpting, whenever you're doing damage and stuff like that, is go a little bit stronger than you think you need to, because whenever you start to zoom away with stuff, let's say you see it this far away, you won't see that too much. Maybe you will in texture, but if you were doing this for a video game, you know, you need to have pretty quick, bold reads. That's where you might be a bit more aggressive on something like that. So anyways, I'm going to go through and just continue to start cutting away and doing more damage across this whole thing. Oh, interesting. I had some stuff come through the side. This is a great place. Remember we did the orb slash? I think what happened is we have penetration on the brushes. We're starting to bleed through and go through too far. I may need to adjust that in my brush setting, but since we have that morph target stored, we could come in, go to our morph target or morph brush, and just quickly paint that out. I'm kind of curious if that's going to affect the other side as well. Nope, it wasn't too deep. Okay. So anyways, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video from now and keep playing it until I am done with this. So just bear with me and enjoy the little resolution going on here. Otherwise, you can skip ahead to the next video where I start to extract masks and do some different stuff. Okay, see you in a few. Okay, I'm back. So that sped up time lapse that you saw took roughly about 25 minutes. So depending on how much time you guys want to spend on it, you can add more details. As I was sculpting this and doing some things, I noticed a few things I want to show you guys. So for example, you may have seen me switching to a morph brush. Notice in here on some of these places, it looks like the edges got really, really pinched. Sometimes whenever you use this surface deformer over here and you apply the noise to the mesh, like during this apply to mesh phase, things will kind of get this pillowed out looking effect or pinching effect. So that's why I always store a morph target beforehand. So not only can you go through and then remove destruction like here, like I just did, but also too for something like this, if you go over this a bit, you can kind of get it back to its original state. Like if it's doing too much of that pinching and it feels a little bit too CG, you can bring back some of those shapes. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you start to see like a lot of pinching or bloating on something, it's because when you apply that surface noise to the mesh, you can get some kind of strange things happening. The other thing that I noticed too is, remember earlier whenever I used a morph brush to remove this, I had a really large brush size, and because it was big, it was actually penetrating through to the other side. So all around here you can see we still have that nice noise, but in some places over here it's a little bit less. So if we want to bring in some more of that surface detail over in these flat areas to keep this uniform, all we have to do is come back to surface and noise. We can just click on this. It'll have the original noise setting that we had. Remember, this is just a visual representation. It's not actually on the surface. Now what you can say is mask by noise instead of apply to mesh. And now it's got the same mesh that was used to create all this different information. So we can just switch back to our standard brush, add that to a subtract, and you could just paint over these areas a little bit and start to bring in some of that surface detail that was occurring before. If you did need to get a lot of those, uh, sorry about my voice cracking, if you needed to get some of those little tiny surface details just to make sure this feels a bit more uniform across the side. I'm noticing my lazy mouse is on because I just restarted ZBrush a while ago, so I'm just kind of go through and turn that off, maybe turn down the strength of these as well. And remember, we still have that morph target stored, so if at any point this feels too aggressive, we can always go back and change it. So I'm going to clear the mask, and let's take a look again. Now it feels a bit more uniform through here, so I like that. I'm going to say mask by noise again, and just get a couple more of these spaces that felt like they were empty. Okay, cool. I think this is probably good enough. Normally I would go through here and make sure there was a bit more in there too, but I think we'll be fine. So I think just final touches, I'm just going to go through again with my morph brush and some of the areas that maybe feel like there was some weird stuff happening during the noise surface applied to mesh phase, and just remove a little bit of that pinching. Mostly we were seeing it on the front sides here. So like here, we're getting it a little bit. So I'll get the original kind of more rounded shape back on some of these, and then I'll probably do one more final quick destruction pass on some of those just to break up any of the edges if I see it. Although it's feeling pretty good right now, so we probably won't need to do that. This one is really clearly pinched in here, and that's definitely a byproduct of that apply to mesh section. Again, we probably wouldn't see it if you're viewing it from here, but it's good to know. Like if you're in a production environment and you needed something really clean, that could cause some problems. When I say production environment, I mean if you're working for a company or doing something like that, and you may just want to check anywhere that had sharp edges, you can check to see if it was doing that same thing with the morph brush. But honestly, I think we're in pretty good shape now. So let's put this in perspective mode, and then we'll just do a quick render and see how this looks. Yeah, I think that's going to work pretty nice, especially once we start having sharp shadows in different areas and we get the texture on here. It's going to cut through really, really nicely, I believe. The shadows and everything are going to fall off really nice. And here, that's where I'm feeling maybe there's a couple little sharp areas, so that's where you could go through. Just do one little final clay buildup removal or breakup of the edges. And if you guys haven't done this in a while, if you're working from home and following this, I highly recommend as soon as you're done with this, save a new version of your Z tool. Last thing you want this to do is crash once you get it all done. You could really spend forever doing this. Depending on how much time and patience you have. Sometimes I watch like little shows in the background. I was watching some UFC while I had the time lapse sped up. You kind of just zone out, get those details in, and be making art at the same time. So, win-win. Okay, I think that's good. I'm just going to save this off, and then I think we'll move on to the next chapter. This tutorial and its downloadable content is available now on my ZBrush, Gumroad, and Steam stores, which are linked in the description below. Watch the following video to see what is included with your purchase. If you purchase this tutorial, here is a preview of all the bonus content you will receive. Firstly, in ZBrush, I've included 3 different versions of the Amulet. 1, my final sculpted version with all the ornamentational details and destruction. 2, just the sculptural details like ornamentation. 3, a version without anything so you could follow along and create your own during the process. Secondly, you will receive the final keyshot file demonstrated here, which contains all of the texture maps, lighting, and everything that is shown during the tutorial. The thing that I find really useful about this is having access to the material graph and seeing the complex custom materials that are created during the tutorial. This will really help you with understanding how to create your own complex materials in Keyshot. Next, you will receive all of the final PSD files showcased throughout the tutorial, including this gold-painted Mount Fuji design with all of my different layering processes, as well as the custom crest base that is used later for sculpting in ZBrush based off of masks. Also, you'll get all of the final texture maps that are showcased during the tutorial, such as these, which are all tileable. You will also receive all of the original videos in downloaded format at their full high definition resolution. Also, I have included dozens of high quality personal art images such as my Dark Souls 3 High Lord of Walnar fan art, which inspired me to create the Amulet tutorial to showcase the techniques I learned and developed during the process. Whether you purchase this tutorial or follow along for free on Facebook or YouTube, thank you for your continued support, and I cannot wait to see the epic amulets you create soon.